and welcome to the Abundology podcast. My name is Renee Spears, and I'm here today with one of my good friends, Lori Ann Rising. Lori does everything. You're an author, you're the host of the You Rising podcast, you do coaching, you do mentoring, like you're the whole package. You're the complete package, Lori.
Well, thank you.
It's like, what do I say to that, Renee?
Pretty much. Yeah, I'm not sure, but thank you.
Well, Lori also does channeling. And so we have been having conversations lately about psychic abilities and channeling and how this is so different for everybody. So I thought this would be a really great time to talk about like all things psychic. So we don't use that word too often anymore, the psychic word. It seems kind of like an old-fashioned, word, now more intuitive or using your intuition. But COVID to me feels like this point when as spirits, we're awakening on this planet. And along with that goes the awakening of our intuitive or our psychic abilities. And I think some people don't even know how those show up because there's so many different ways. And we'll talk about, I don't know, I think I have 20 of the different ways it shows up written down to discuss this podcast. But let's talk first about how and when you first knew about your skills that you had to connect with the universe, Lori. Did that happen when you were a child?
So it's interesting because I can look back now and say that I was doing it, but at the time it was like putting on pants, everybody does it. And at least from my perception, of course, everybody would do this. So it's just normal and, whatever. And I remember what stands out to me really was, of course, growing up in the Pacific Northwest, especially in the spring and the fall, the weather is like neurotic, wait 10 minutes and it's going to change. And back in the 80s, they didn't have the Doppler, they didn't have all the other stuff. And so literally it was like, look outside, whatever the weather forecast is pretty much a joke. But, we can use it as a guideline.
Right.
And I remember we always walked to school. And so I just got in this habit every morning, regardless of what the weather report said, regardless of what it was looking like outside, I would stop at my closet and just ask in my head, do I need my umbrella or not? And inevitably I would hear an answer, like, that still small voice in the back of my mind, and I would just follow it. It never occurred to me to ask what it was. It never occurred to me to think anything other than, okay, I got my answer, so just follow it. And it wasn't until I think it was fourth grade, maybe fifth grade, something like that, somewhere in that general vicinity. I remember coming to school one morning and the weather report said it was supposed to be sunny all week. It was a gorgeous morning, but that voice had told me to take my umbrella. And so I walked in and of course, nobody else had theirs. So I'm kind of a little bit embarrassed now. So I'm kind of trying to hide it under my coat as I'm hanging stuff up. And I heard one of the guys in the background in the class say, oh my goodness, Lori brought her umbrella. We're getting wet today. And I froze. I thought I'd gotten caught doing something wrong was kind of the energy, like, oh my God, they caught me. And I turned around. I had no idea who said it. And the entire class is now staring at me. And I remember the teacher sort of mumbling something about intuition and then getting everybody focused on something. And sure enough, that afternoon, it was pouring down rain and I was the only one dry. So I'm like walking home thinking about all of this, And so that evening, I asked my parents, well, what is intuition? And I mean, you probably remember in the 80s, anything associated with psychic, intuitive, even alternative care practices, yoga
true.
and
Yep.
chiropractic, it was all associated with the paganistic, occult, fraud, all of that kind of stuff. It was just so grouped in together. I'm so grateful that's changed.
Yes.
So my parents' knee-jerk reaction, both of them, was it doesn't exist. Anybody who tells you it does is a complete fraud. And
Wow.
every ounce of my being went, they're wrong.
Um,
And I just knew they're wrong. I mean, I just like had this whole experience that showed they're wrong. And I've been doing this for a while, you know? And it was so interesting because I decided right then and there that I would just hide it. And my intention was to protect it. But clearly, if I listened to it, other people would notice. So I had to stop listening to it in order to fully hide it. And
mm,
so, yes, it was a part of my life, clearly from the beginning. And I can't say that it ever went away because I would, it feels like there are times where it really broke through and it was there no matter what. But I didn't really actively start to re-engage with it and teach myself to start trusting it again until my late 20s or early 30s. So there's a huge gap in there where I blatantly ignored it. And the more I ignored it, the more messed up my life got. So I think I got to the point where I'm like, okay, clearly that's not working. So what if I actually went back to it?
right.
You know?
Well, and I think that's a similar story for so many people that when they're younger, and because we don't have all the conditioning and that around us, we are, in my opinion, more open to receiving messages. And we
Mhm.
talk about that with, our parents, our grandparents, or whatever. But if they're not believers, like you're saying, you can shut that down, like right there. That doesn't exist. No, you're wrong. And, as a little kid, good thing for you that you knew with every soul, every part of your being that it wasn't true. But so many people, I believe, have the opposite experience of, yeah, that probably, yeah, they're
Mhm.
right. Yes. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really is. And I'm so grateful, though, that the world is shifting, that these things are sort of coming out and being more normalized. They're being studied and proven that it works. Even if we don't understand it, we can prove that it is real.
Right.
We were watching a show recently, and it was so cool because there's actually an institute in California that works with kids in elementary and middle school age and teaches them how to expand their consciousness to the point where they can see completely blindfolded.
That is so cool.
And we watched this really, I mean, both my partner and I were just like had our jaws on our laps the whole time because these kids are actually like reading a book word for word with these industrial size thick blindfolds on. And what was so interesting was that one of the girls, her father didn't believe that this was actually real. So he showed up to one of the sessions to just observe. And he was in a chair kind of far back from the table at first. And they were doing their thing and, reading, and he still questioned. So he wanted to get up and get closer. As he moved closer, the girl started making comments about, well, my eyesight's going away. I can't see anymore. And so the teacher, without indicating what was going on, just waved dad back and then just said, okay, just focus a little bit more here, and just kept her going. And the further away dad got, the better her vision got. So clearly there's an energetic exchange that goes on too. And so I'm really hopeful that maybe the next phase is not just being able to teach them how, but to hold on to it regardless of the energy or belief of others. And
Ah,
that's a
yes.
more mature, and I think that's part of my own path too. It's like, yeah, I would have hits, but if other people weren't believing in it, then I would squash it down. So a big part of my journey has been able to get to a point where I can say, no, this is what is true, and I will stand in it and believe it regardless of anything else.
That's so good.
And there
Yes.
are still days, but
You are human right now too. So yes.
exactly, there's that. But I think that is part of the journey. It's one thing to have it, it's another to be able to hold it that well. And
Yes.
that's an ongoing life journey, I think.
I agree with you. One of the things that I find interesting is when we share that we have these intuitive abilities, everybody tends to group you all together. Like if you have one of the abilities, you have all of the abilities. Like I, as you know, get messages from guides to pass on. But I've had many people ask me, well, can you talk to, my dead relatives? Can you predict the future? Can you do this or that? And it's like, no, I can't. My skill set is in these things. And they're so, as I was doing the research for this podcast today, I was just blown away at how many different ways that people get messages. So, for instance, there is the mediumship where you're communicating with spirits, precognition, where you're able to see future events, psychic surgery. And this, I think of John of God, and I'm not sure where he is, Brazil maybe, but he does surgery psychically, energetically on people, removing tumors sometimes, and then energetically they're sealed back up. So clearly we don't have that ability. We're not grouped into that.
I don't think I'd want that one, honestly.
I don't
not real
either.
good with the whole surgery thing, but I'm glad somebody can do it.
And then, of course, clairvoyance, when you're able to perceive the future. We have so many, especially in Portland right now, so many spiritual healers with Reiki that are able to channel energies into the body for healing that way. Once again, clairaudience, where you hear voices. Clairvoyance, you see images. Clairsentience, where you have the feelings, like your gut, your intuition. Claircognizance, when it's the knowing. My son and my sister have this, which is the clairliance. Clairliance. I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce it, but it's the smell, where you can smell different smells that I don't think they recognize yet, that they have this ability that they do. But both of them, I have difficulty going places for me because they'll be like, can you smell that? Now, years ago, I met a person and they had a very certain stinky smell. Didn't know what it was.
Mm-hmm.
A few days later, they passed away. This happened multiple times then. In, the next couple decades, if I would meet somebody and they would have the same smell, sure enough, within the next little time period, they would pass away. So I think that we have we can't group ourselves into one group. Like I am a clairvoyant, or I think we have a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this to make up who we are.
Well, I think it's kind of like, okay, we all have fingers and we all have fingerprints, but the fingerprints are unique to each of us. These abilities are unique to each of us as well. I mean, some people are empaths, some people can go, and extend that into a more psychic ability. I know somebody who can hold an object and get impressions of the past with those objects. And, those kinds of things as well. That's not something that I do. But I think too, to some degree, when we start tapping into what is ours, we can work with it, deepen it, expand it, and strengthen it. It's like, an artist who has a talent, if they never use it, they can't find out what's possible. But if they practice it regularly, it could expand in ways they never dreamed of later.
Yes.
And that's the fun part. That's kind of, I think, the place I'm at is like, okay, so there's this that I've been doing. How far can it go? What's possible with this? And so I've been playing with that this year in particular, and it's been kind of mind-blowing, actually.
Yeah, I think that practice, just like anything else, Michael Jordan didn't go out there the first, year of high school ball and become, it was all of his years of practice. So I know
and what's interesting is he was actually cut from the team a couple of years because he was so bad.
Yes.
But he wanted it so much. The practice made up the difference and made him the best ever in the field, which I kind of perceive that as, because I feel like we are all born with it. We're all born with some aspect. So it's just allowing that to grow and working with it.
Well, and I think some of us, I agree with you that we are all born with that. And these abilities now are coming forward more and
Yes.
more into
Yes.
our lives. But I think some of us aren't even aware that this is an ability. Like, oh, I can smell things. Oh, I can know things. Oh, this is how it shows up. So just even
Right.
knowing that all of these different ways exist.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Well, and that's, I think, the cool part about having experienced our cultural shift into normalizing these so that we can talk about them. I mean, even as a child, I knew if I told people I heard a voice, I'd have been committed or put on medication. There was no way I could admit that that voice told me to do that, even if that was a positive outcome. And I was at a church camp, for heaven's sakes, and I still knew no one would believe me and I would probably be committed. Today I can say that and they're like, oh, cool, which guide spoke to you? You know, like it's a whole different conversation.
Yes.
And so to be able to normalize these things and talk about them, I think, you know, and in some fields, it's like, well, are we just diagnosing more or is it happening more? And I think it's both. Like we're recognizing more because we can talk about it. And there are more people expressing what they have in greater ways also. Like the age of Aquarius, we've done podcast recently, we had a guest that talked about, well, what really is the age of Aquarius and what does it mean? And he talked about how it really is this place where humanity is opening up to the deeper psychic, spiritual realms, and we have a choice to make. We can use these abilities to create good and community wellness and expand that, or we can use it to, you know, create more power and greed. And we're in a time frame right now where we're just discovering these things, and both paths are happening at the same time on the planet. So in the next 100, 200 years, we got to decide collectively which path we're going to take and how we're going to choose to use these psychic abilities that are emerging.
Yes.
And it was such a cool conversation. I just totally got goosebumps. But anyway.
I love it when that happens. Okay. So I know that you recently have been practicing. And I want to talk about in a little bit some other ways that people can start to recognize and practice these things in our life. But tell us what you have done recently.
So one of the things I started wondering is like, okay, I'm curious about this. And so I kind of started by talking with other people and exploring what are some of the gifts? What does it look like? Is there any that I have? And I realized I'm like, okay, so I'll ask a question in my journal and get a response, or I'll focus on something and hear a response in my head. And I wanted to know, I'm like, well, can I channel? And so I took a little class, and of course, like the first 15 minutes when he's describing what channeling is, I went, oh, I've been doing that since I was a kid. Huh, okay, I guess I'm a channeler.
Yes.
And so I thought, okay, great. Well, clearly I'm getting this information for myself in my life. Can I get information for others and expand it in a way that could be of service? And so I posted a request on Facebook, said, look, I'm experimenting. If you're game to play along, I can't guarantee results, but let me know if you're interested and I'll channel something for you. Send me a question. And I thought I'd get like 10 responses. I think I got like 70 or more. And I went, oh, okay, that might be a sign. Cool. So I dove in, and I didn't filter questions. I just kind of went, okay, here's an opportunity to see what works, what doesn't, where does my skill lie, what am I comfortable with, and went for it. And over and over again, what I noticed was that one, if somebody was really focused about trying to understand their right path that is most in alignment with who they're born to be, those were the things that came through the clearest for me. but it didn't mean that I didn't get in other information. Like there was one woman who asked to connect with her sister because there was some unfinished, she had a question. And so part of that was, okay, well, I've never attempted to communicate knowingly with somebody who has passed, so I don't know if I can. So part of that was sort of sitting down and asking, like, okay, if this is real, allow something to come through that is so obvious it's from her that the person I'm doing this for will just clearly know. And I tend to get pictures. Often there are words as well, but there's usually pictures that I just describe, or, the impressions, things like that. And in that case, what came through was, first it was a can of sardines. And I'm like, okay, I can't stand sardines. I have no idea what this would be metaphorically to me. I don't know what this is. So I just sort of watched, and the sardine can opened and there were olives mixed in inside. And I'm like, well, I hate olives too in my life. So I don't know what this could be metaphorically, but okay, we'll go with this. And then the images started to shift and there were some other things that came through. So I just shared all of that with the person. And she wrote back and she's like, well, that was definitely my sister because her favorite snack was sardines and olives. And I went,
Oh, wow.
okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
That blew me away.
Yeah.
There was somebody else that was asking about her horse. And she gave me a one-line question. I had no backstory to work with, no information to work with. And it was so interesting because as I focused on the question and what was going on, I literally felt like an energy presence next to me. And when I shared what came through, her response was, yep, I absolutely know exactly what you're talking about. That makes total sense. I know what to do now. And thank you. I was like, oh, okay. And I still have no idea what the backstory is. So I'm like, whatever works. But over and over again, what I really got out of that was that clearly there is something I can tap into. There are aspects of it I am far more comfortable with and far more, I hesitate to use talent because I think there's assumptions with that, but more naturally geared for, maybe might be a way of putting it. And which was part of the experiment. It's like, okay, what direction to use this in? I also found it very fascinating that along these lines, I did speak with one woman who was like, well, okay, I want to ask a question about my daughter. She's going through this. What should she do? And instantaneously, I heard no. And I was like, okay, she needs to ask about herself. It's not okay. Like, I didn't have permission to get information about somebody else who wasn't present and couldn't give permission.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really interesting. So those kinds of things, I feel like even the guides respect boundaries,
Yes.
and at least with me. So I thought that was really cool to notice. So to help people focus on what their own path is and helping them get into alignment, which is fully in alignment with everything else I feel passionate about doing. So it was just cool to see that. And that was totally new to me, to be honest.
Yeah. And also interesting how, as we talked about a minute ago, you don't have one skill set. You see the images, and some people, I know that we've talked about this before, not on the podcast, see metaphoric images, like what could sardines and olives really be about?
Right.
And then other ones are literal, oh, that's her favorite snack, so there's so many different things that are now coming out. And I think of myself as one of them, having kind of this weird that other people I don't know have the manifesting ability that I have. It started in a similar way when I was younger. We had a big, huge tree in our front yard, and I would spend hours under that tree, just laying there daydreaming about everything. I just love to daydream, still do. And then the daydreams would come true. So
Mm.
until I was in my mid 20s, I believed that this is how you lived, how you created something. You just daydream about it and then it happens. For instance, one time I was in high school and I was a freshman and I had a crush on, the senior jock, Mr. Popular, basketball superstar, all that stuff. And all I wanted to do was go out on a date with him. So I daydreamed about going out on a date with him. Like, really, what are the chances? Freshman, sophomore, or senior? Well, lo and behold, he moved right next door to me, and for years I believed it was my manifesting abilities. We actually did go out on one date, and that was enough to realize that my idea in my head of who he was not accurate. But then when I was working, is when it had Rose City Mortgage, was really when everything started to become clear to me. My employees would say, "Hey, Renee, could you help me, get this loan approved?" Or, "Hey, Renee, can you help my child get into this preschool? Hey, Renee, can you help me, attract my vacation home?" And I jokingly said, "Oh yeah, I'll put that in my meditation." And I did. I would, picture them with the vacation home or this preschool or whatever, and it would come true. And, the
Mm.
first few times, oh, ha, ha, coincidence. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But then after it's 20, 30, 40 times, it starts to click. Oh, there's something to this. There's
Mm-hmm.
something more to this. So, kind of a different ability that doesn't fit into one of the categories that we know. But I have a
Mm-hmm.
feeling there's a whole bunch of these types of abilities out there of people just thinking, oh, this is how life is, or everybody has this skill, all these things.
Well, and I think that's true of any talent. I mean, I know as a writer, it took me years to realize other people didn't write the same way. And it wasn't until I was actually helping and coaching other authors that I went, oh, maybe I do actually have a talent here. And I think it's really because we are so close to it. It's like a fish in water. Try
Uh,
to get a fish to see the water. They don't unless they're taken out of it, right?
yes.
And so we're like that with our own stuff, our own world, our own talents and gifts. We are so close to them. They're so natural that we don't see them. And we run the risk of discounting them. It's like, oh, but that's
Yes.
just too easy. That's
Yes.
not a real thing. It's not valuable. It's just too easy. And it's like, wait a minute, but it's not for everybody else.
Yes.
Therein lies the value of it. And
Yes.
so, and we all fall into it. We all do it, unless we've been lucky enough to have a parent who reminds us of those things, which I have a feeling more parents are now, but I certainly didn't grow up with that version.
Yeah.
So it's something I think we really need other people in the world to mirror back to us as much as we mirror to them. Because there's people that love doing what I am horrible at. And I want them in my life,
Yes,
right?
exactly. To do the things we're horrible at. Yes,
Right,
exactly.
right. I see people kind of like puzzle pieces, the talents are that piece of the puzzle that sort of sticks out from the rest, and where we're weak is the piece that sort of goes in, and we're supposed to connect with each other, to create this bigger vision of possibility.
Right. Right. Well, and also, like, I agree with you, not recognizing the skills that you have. So one of the ways, being a manifester in this law of attraction, one of the ways, if you wanted to start developing your skills, is to write down anything unusual that happens. Anything. Oh, I saw a feather 3 times today. Oh, I had this feeling when I met so and so. Oh, I had this funky smell when I met so and so. Oh, I heard this voice in my head. So concentrating on what is there, like focusing on that. Oh, let
Mm-hmm.
me write this down, because a lot of times while you're practicing, you're not really sure what things mean. Like, I didn't know the smell meant death until it happened numerous times.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and there's two things that come to mind, because I think dreams play an important role. At least they do for me. Like, I have been journaling about my dreams since I was a kid. So I'm very familiar with the metaphoric images that come through, which I think is why when I'm channeling, I get the metaphoric images, because I have such a relationship with that method of communication. And I love metaphors. I was writing in metaphor, I mean, before it was taught in school, basically. And it was funny because I remember going to class and they were talking about, well, here's what a metaphor is. And I went, oh, that's what I've been doing all these years. That's good to know. It has a name. So that's just, it's ingrained in me somehow.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there are those aspects for all of us if we pay attention. And I love writing it down, watching for patterns.
For patterns.
And
Yep.
sometimes they're disconnected. You might have that experience and it could be months later that you connect the dots. And so it's really important to write them down. But it's also important to realize that sometimes our intuition is directing us in a way that we'll never see the why. So, like the idea of, oh, I'm supposed to turn right here. I may not realize that that just helped me avoid a car wreck. All I know is that I turned right and my path was smooth, you know? But maybe if I had gone straight one more block, who knows what would have happened. So sometimes the intuition part, or those hits, we just have to go on trust and faith. And I think that that needs to be built by watching all of the other times you paid attention and it worked. And so
Yes.
then if you pay attention and you just don't get feedback, count that as it worked.
Yes.
Really.
Yes.
That is the feedback.
Yes. And just as you get messages in metaphors sometimes, I think because I was so much in the business world for 30 years, I get downloads of business plans. Is that exciting? No, but I think I get that because I understand that's my language. I understand how all that works.
It's interesting. I've been working on a presentation the last couple of days around what intuition is. And it's so fascinating because nobody quite knows how to explain it or define it or understand it. And like the psychological definition, so that they can study it, has to do with tapping into the unconscious in the brain, which I think is part of it. But I did a survey recently and actually asked a bunch of women, how would you define intuition? And have been watching all these programs and working with mine. And if you don't mind, I came up with my own working definition.
Oh, yes.
That I think works really well. I don't know if I'll evolve it or not, but for right now, I was like one of those moments where I'm like, oh, this is really cool. So I have the working definition that intuition is the exchange of information between us and the life energy that moves in, through, and as every living being, seen and unseen. And so to me, I mean, you look at the quantum realm and they've proven there is an energy that moves through everything and literally through it, and that energy carries information across distance instantaneously. And it moves through us too. And it engages, in my opinion, with our mind, our heart, our gut, our physiological being, to communicate in a way that we understand. There's an intelligence in this that the quantum scientists has actually been able to prove. And we are clearly relating with it in some ways. It's almost like I kind of envision it like these outlets all over us that we get to plug into. And I have some that are more active than others. Somebody else will have a different outlet that's more active than mine, and,
yes.
Kind of thing. But it is all there. And so it's an exchange of information, because we can ask questions too and get the answer. Like, it's not a one-way street here. Yes. And there are other times where I'm just like downloaded with a knowing, and I'm like, I just know, like, that is what it is, kind of thing. So it's definitely a reciprocal conversation, I think, with whatever that is, which is why I've come to call it my wise one within, or the wow in my life. And I know when I'm more in alignment with it, there's an even greater wow in my life all the time. So that's just my concept, so that I remember it is a relationship with whatever that is.
Well, and with any type of relationship, it's a two-way street. So it's not like you're just sitting there passively waiting for
Exactly.
for somebody to come along and love you, you know. You have to develop this relationship and pay attention, ask questions, expect answers. You know, I expect when I can't figure something out with my human brain that I give it up. I ask, hey, guides, help me figure out this question. And here's where the faith and the trust comes in. Then I let it go with the believing and the faith and the trust that the answer is going to come to me at some point. Sometimes it's instantaneous in that second, but most of the time it's not. Most of the time I go through the day and then, oh, I'll see something and then I'll know, oh, that's the right answer. So
Mm-hmm.
it's establishing these relationships with your guides, with your higher power, with your own inner knowing and faith and trust.
Mm-hmm.
And then showing up, being present. I don't think you can do this work without being present.
Absolutely not. And I do know that sometimes if there's something important enough, they will break through. I mean, I've had that experience too. But for the most part, you don't want to wait for the 2x4. It's just so much
No,
easier.
yes.
Just so much easier to, even when you're busy, stop and breathe every once in a while and get re-embodied, and
Yes.
get centered and get present, and then move forward again. Because I really think so much of it is like, like when I'm supposed to listen for guidance or something, or to pay attention, my ear will start ringing.
Mm.
And it took me a long time to figure out what that meant, because it was like, why is my ear randomly ringing, kind of thing. And that's gone on my whole life. I think it has to do more with my grandmother, because I think actually it more started after she passed. So there was a connection there. But there's certain things where we have to learn our own body signals, because it'll
Yes.
communicate with us. Sometimes it's emotions. I absolutely strongly believe that every emotion has a gift and a message for us. That's why I created a meditation on my website to help people get to those. And as we do, we deepen our relationship with that particular method of communication, with our guides, with our intuition, with ourselves. So sometimes it's emotions. Sometimes it's a heart, like my heart will beat faster or slower, or sometimes it's literally my gut or my stomach, or, like I said, my ear ringing, or sometimes it just feels like there's a presence around me, and that always makes me uncomfortable, but at least I'm like, okay, I get it, you're here. So just that awareness to develop requires presence. You
Requires
have to
presence.
pay attention. Yeah.
Yes. And then I think the more that you experience it and you're present, that's when the faith and the trust, especially in yourself, starts to get established. I would say the majority of the clients that come see me and I pass on messages, they already know this stuff. I think what makes their reading good for them is that I am acknowledging and reinforcing what they already know. Like, oh, I knew that. So, but instead of being able to trust themselves, which a lot of times we need to hear it from outside ourselves, is this really happening or am I fucking crazy? No, you're not crazy. This is really, really happening. And
Or it could be both. I mean,
well,
you can be
there's always
crazy
both.
and it's real.
Yeah, true. That's true. But just knowing that then, oh yeah, I can trust myself starts to build that muscle or whatever you would call it. Yeah. So,
Absolutely. I think that's so needed. And I think that's again why I so appreciate that our culture is getting more open with the conversations, because We need that mirror. We need to be able to distinguish, because we all have those times in our life where I'm like, I thought that was my intuition, but I look back and go, well, my intuition is neutral. And I clearly had myself emotionally hyped up and convinced myself of what I wanted, when really underneath I had a feeling otherwise. And that's just part of the learning curve. It's
Yep.
part of being human. But we need some time, because it can be very difficult in those moments to tease that apart, especially if we're really afraid or really excited, or what our intuition wants from us is just so left field that we
Yes.
don't know how to integrate it. And even on a regular basis, it is, like you and I work together because it's just so dang helpful to have the opportunity to bounce stuff back and forth. Because even though I know, talking with somebody whose intuition and psychic abilities come through different channels, hearing it in a different way with different
Yes.
details can make the picture more clear too. And
Yes.
so, it's cool to work together. I think that community aspect of all of this, I want to say, is it's like greater than the whole. It's that synergy thing. I'm one and you're one, but together it's like, wow, that's just a whole different level of possibility.
Yeah.
Um, so I think there's a lot to that. Just sharing it, share
Think
it
of
with
the
people that are safe.
And think of the possibilities if you got, let's just say, 10 people with different intuitive skills together, and each person used the skills that they had to help solve a problem or get clarity around something. Think how powerful that would be. And I'm excited to say that I think that is where we are moving into as a society. As you know, I'm a
I
positive thinker, so you know.
I think so too. And I think there's really something to that, because I think there's, and I don't, I think, hmm, my brain just went in three different directions. So I got to like breathe and go, spit it out correctly. So I'm realizing, because there is a way in which I think, and maybe it's another aspect to test. I'm just realizing in the moment, the empathic abilities I have, it's not just feeling what others feel, but to some degree being able to influence them energetically.
Mm,
And I have played with this before and sort of done it like, okay, this is a belief that I hold, so I'll just hold it as if. But I do remember one experience in particular where it was a business meeting, and I was sitting with a gentleman across the table, and we were at odds in terms of what the right direction to go was. And he was very firm and clear, and it was a bit testy. It was never impolite, but it was tense conversation. And in the middle of the conversation, listening to him kind of go off on one of his rants, in my mind, I took a deep breath and I just started asking a different question and went, okay, how might this be perfect? What's possible here? And I started shifting my energy around that. And literally, as he's still ranting, I watched his shoulders drop and his tone shifted. And by the time he was done, the rest of the conversation was totally amicable. And so I think there is something to, even our emotional field being really present in how that works with ourselves and each other. Because I also know, I mean, when we see it with kids, when we're upset, kids are upset. When we calm down, the kids calm down. Like it or not, they're beautiful mirrors for how we're feeling, whether we're conscious of that or not.
yeah, our pets are like that too.
Yes.
You see dogs that are out of control and really hyper, and and then lo and behold, the owner's kind of the same way. So I'm glad Jack is really chill. So I guess that says something about me. Now,
That says a lot about you.
now, are there any things that you do to help prepare yourself to receive messages when you want to receive them? I know that I have this talisman like bracelet that I have worn for a couple decades. I saw the Dalai Lama with it. It's gone to meditation, meditations with me, labyrinth walks, all that. So to me, when I put this on, it is my signal to the universe that, okay, I'm open for business now. You know, this means, okay, the open sign is on.
Nice.
Yeah, I also have like a little incantation thing that I say before, each reading. I'll say it quickly because it's, not that much, is open my heart and my mind and my soul to receive the highest messages of the highest vibration for the highest good. Absolutely do not let any of my personal beliefs that are not for the highest good come through. So with that, I feel like I'm really setting my intention of what the on is.
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything like that that you do that kind of signals that you're open for business?
Well, it's very similar. And I'm still developing it and still sort of evolving it. Because like I said, the channeling for others piece has been something that I've explored more this year. So up to this point, it's been more just, when I'm journaling, I just write a question and
Mm-hmm.
respond to it. And even sometimes in meditation, just sitting down with a question and sort of watching and listening and feeling for what comes through. When I'm preparing for others, it's very similar to what you're doing. I don't have anything physical that I put on, but I will sit down and really, I want to say more of a prayer or a meditation and say, whatever comes through, may it be for the highest and best of everyone who is touched by it directly and indirectly.
That's good.
Because I know, I may be talking to one person, but that person is going to be touching others' lives.
Right.
And vice versa for me. I know, what I do impacts others. And so whatever I do, I'm always holding that highest and best perspective for myself and others. And I do often also, whether it's part of preparing for somebody else or simply just going about my daily life, I'm often in a space of saying, look, let it be the highest and best and protect me from all of the energies that would want something different. Remove them from my life, protect them, whether they're trying to drain me, whether they're unconsciously competing with me, whether they're, whatever it is. If it's not the highest and best, just simply remove it. And it's a wonderful feeling and experience to feel the energy shift in those moments. And I have noticed the more often I do them, whether I'm preparing for somebody else or not, like the easier life is getting. So I'm like, well, we'll just do this no matter what kind of thing. So it is fun and interesting. I don't usually when I'm preparing to channel for somebody else, I have tried the idea of like, okay, what might you want me to say? Like maybe there's a message that comes through ahead of time. So far, that hasn't been the case. It's been in the moment types of things and in the interaction itself that has really created the response. So that's kind of interesting to know because I know other people are a little different. They can sit down, they get a message ahead of time, and then it comes through. When I was working with cards a little bit, I haven't done it recently, but I did pull cards a couple of times for people and then shared those cards with them afterwards. And they were shocked at how fitting the cards were, which to me, I didn't know obviously ahead of time. So I think if I worked more with cards, that might come up. I kind of go back and forth on that one a little bit, which is partly to do with my lifestyle. Being a digital nomad, there's just certain things I can't set up all the time and have handy.
Right.
So,
well, and that's a good reminder also of all the additional ways people read tea leaves and cards, crystal balls, literally. I know that my friend Deborah Norton, she is an astrologer and she does the chart reading, but really, just like me, being talking about abundance and money as the entryway to the spiritual stuff, to her, the entryway to the reading is astrology. Same thing with my friend Jamie with the Akashic Records reading. That's another whole level of, I kind of put that into the psychic surgery category. Like these people have super cool skills, but again, you're coming for your records reading to know Akashic Records, of course, are soul records. And she does that, opens the records, tells you what they said, but she also then has this intuitive ability that she gives other messages that come through. So there's not one way of doing this. And I think that is so important for people to understand, that there's multiple ways that we right now, like my weirdness of daydreaming and creating life, that, that there are thousands, millions, I don't even know, of ways out there that people are communicating and connecting to that universal knowledge.
Yeah. I would say whatever works for somebody. Like for me, the cards were a great place to start because it helped give me something to focus on. And especially working with somebody else, it gave me something to talk about. When I was nervous and having a difficult time, like I know it's there, but it helped me get past certain initial stages. It was sort of like training wheels, I want to say.
Yeah.
And so I've deliberately trained myself not necessarily to need them in every reading, but I do find that there are times where I still love pulling them out and playing with them and doing something with them, because it is a focal point. And they're just fun, really. So I think it's, whatever works for somebody. Yeah. Really find your thing and do that.
Speaking of that, one of your things that you're starting now is questions you're afraid to ask out loud. I love this idea. It's like a completely updated version of Dear Abby.
Well, as you know, I love questions. Like there's something about like, just ask me a question and something just comes through. And I love the experience of it. And what people share back with me is how much they really value and appreciate whatever it was that just came through.
Yeah.
And for some reason, it is something that works really well for me, and that me kind of shifts aside, and I guess it's a channeling method for me.
Yeah.
But the trick is I need somebody to ask. Like it really.
Well, you just started doing this, a few days ago. And already have all these questions. And one of the things I love about what you're doing, and even with the podcasts and stuff that we do, we want to get knowledge out. You don't have to pay for this stuff. That there's all this knowledge. This podcast is free. Your podcasts are free. You have the people, if they have a question and they right now don't have the money to pay for a question, they can ask you a question for free on your website. They can also, and you'll reply in social media and you'll get the answers that way, correct?
Yeah. So I'm setting it up so that there's really three options, in that they can, just submit the question and then watch my blog and social media for the answer. There is absolutely no way at all I have any idea who they are or could connect the dots back to them. If they want it more personalized, like sent to their email, or, there's even the opportunity to have an interactive session with me that they can ask. So there are additional ways to make it more personal, and I keep it all private and confidential, whatever that looks like. You can use a fake name, keep the video off, whatever. So you can even be anonymous if it's interactive. Right. So there's lots of opportunities, and I love the questions. And so I'm really excited about this. I'm excited because it's going to turn into, like I said, blog posts or columns or things like that I really believe is going to serve other people.
Right.
Because from my own experience, from working with women and just the human experience in general, it's so interesting that when we do have the courage to speak those things out loud, one, the power in them tends to dissolve. So we realize, oh, well, that's not as big a deal as I thought. Quite often,
Mm,
not always. There are some questions that really are that big. But quite often we discover they're not. And many of those questions we keep inside because we think we're the only one, or there's shame or embarrassment or fear or things like that. And by sharing them, we get to see that we're not alone. We're not the only one. There's nothing to be embarrassed or ashamed about. You're just human, and it's
right.
totally fine and cool. And so, sharing those, remaining anonymous, is not just going to serve you, but it's going to serve everyone who sees the response. And I've been somebody who responds to questions since I was young. I think that has been one of my triggers throughout my life. I love them. And so setting this up is a wonderful opportunity where I get to expand just a natural ability to be of service, and others get to see their humanness in a more compassionate, gracious way.
Oh, beautiful. I will put a link to the questions, how to ask a question in the show notes for this, also to Lori's website, so you can get more information on her and work with her one-on-one if you'd like to do that. Also, I mentioned a couple people, my friend Deborah Norton, astrologer. I'll put a link to her, and Jamie, who is my friend who does Akashic Records reading. So there's going to be a metric shit ton of links in the show notes this time. And this is
Awesome.
one of the longest podcasts that I have done, I think, ever. So thank you so much for this great conversation. It's always great to talk to you about this. You have such wonderful insight, Lori.
Well, thank you. I love chatting with you. And it feels like it was like about 5 minutes.
I
And so,
know. It was an hour. Can you believe it?
but we have more to say.
I know,
So,
but we have to wrap it up at some point. Maybe we'll come back for, everything psychic 2.0, some
sweet. I
other
love
time.
that.
I love it too. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll talk to you soon.